people filtering. I think we're good. I think we got enough of a group. So thanks everybody for tuning in. I'm John Schwabish. Yeah, that's really all I have. Thanks for coming in. RJ Andrews is here, as you can see. Hi, RJ. Very excited to have him joining me for this chat. We're going to talk about a few things, and then we'll open it up for questions. So if you have questions that you want to ask RJ, just put them in the chat box, and I'll make a list of folks, and then I'll unmute you when we get to that point, so you can ask your own question. No need for me to just like read text messages. That's kind of ridiculous. So RJ and I are going to talk about a few things. I wanted to just share this for those who haven't seen it. This is RJ's California Portrait Map project, which has been funded on Kickstarter. So there you are at the Golden Gate, and it's right behind you too. I can see it. So so RJ, I thought we'd talk about that maybe a little bit, and then we could talk about some of the cool books you have behind you, and then we'll just take some questions. Sound good?
Yeah, that's great.
All right, man. Hey.
So,
and I'll just share my date of his t-shirt for today.
oh my gosh, I love that.
I've got the Muybridge one on today, so I'm starting to run out of shirts. I'll have to, I don't know, get a white t-shirt and just draw something for tomorrow.
That's so great. So yeah, behind me here, you can see it hanging. I also have another print proof of
Nice.
Cross sections through California. And so, where does this come from? So this comes from the intersection of two different threads. One is I attended NACIS, the North American Cartographic Information Society's annual meeting, and I come out of that just wanting to make maps. And there's just so much inspiration and inspiring cartographers, at NACIS. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to make a map in fall 2019. And then at the same time, I'm really falling deep in love with classic isotype designs. And they're most, famous for these sort of stack of icon kind of bar charts, but they also made a lot of really cool pictorial maps, and in particular, these cross-section maps. So I just essentially ripped off isotype design and, re-illustrated, redrew a lot of their icons, recreated a lot of the textures that they used. And, the great thing about this map is that it's really print first, meaning that like you can't really appreciate it completely on a screen. It's a map that's built for its form, or rather the form is designed for the function, kind of, in that it's like, it folds out and it's this big. And what's cool is that I can show you an original isotype map that sort of that inspired it. And the original isotype maps, they are published in books. And so that means that the canvas size of these maps was actually much smaller than California. And so, for example, here we have a cross-sectional map, of the Soviet Union, and, very similar design. And you can see, if I hold it right up to the California map, the California map is much bigger, but it's at the same graphic scale, meaning that, they both use these pine tree icons, and the pine tree icons on both maps are the same size. They both have this wavy blue ocean, and the wavy blue ocean, the line weight and the distance between the waves, all that kind of stuff is the same size. And so the California map, it takes certain points from isotype design, but, the isotype maps aren't necessarily as big. And one of the really genius things about isotype is that the design is so sophisticated because it delivers its story and its message so efficiently, so simplistically, sort of in the best use of the word. And I don't do that. I'm not that sophisticated. I needed a much bigger canvas in order to tell the world about California. But so it's been a lot of fun. And before this pandemic hit, I was very lucky to have the project funded, because I can assure you, once the pandemic hit, we sort of hit a wall with the campaign.
Yeah, I bet. I want to, as you're showing this, the isotype one, I'm reminded of this map that came out, I don't know, a couple months ago, maybe someone created, I think, for like a Makeover Monday project. And it's wealth. It's just an area chart with wealth in the orange color, and then population in the purple color. And I really like this map. I thought this was really clever use of the space and way to combine different visualization types. And a lot of people pushed back and said, well, this is just, you know, per capita GDP, or, you know, or it's just, you know, 2 choropleth maps. But for me, I really liked it because it's just like this different approach. And in your work, you seem to take kind of a similar approach in thinking about ways to show things that we might do in a standard way, sort of trying to turn it on its head a little bit. So, you know, the maps you just showed kind of resonated a little bit. So I wonder how you, when you go into your work, either through the physical stuff that you're working on, or maybe with the client, how do you think about the balance between, yeah, I can make a per capita choropleth map, or I could make this other thing that's has isotypes or something totally different?
Yeah. So all value is sort of a byproduct of attention. Like if you can't hold somebody's attention, if you can't first attract attention and then hold it through engagement, like it doesn't matter. And one of the best ways to both attract attention and engage attention is to present something that's weird. You know, Nightingale knew this. You know, we're celebrating Florence Nightingale across the next couple months because it's her 200th birthday. And Nightingale made all kinds of standard charts. She made bar charts, she made line charts, she made stacked bar charts, she made all kinds of like dot density plots. She made all kinds of stuff that we would recognize as, you know, just standard charts. And we don't remember any of those.
Right.
Those aren't the charts that made the biggest impact in her day either. The chart that made the big impact in her day, and the one that she's remembered by, is the weird chart that, like, honestly, like, doesn't hold up to any sort of, you know, standard rules or criticism or anything else. Right. It's like this weird xenographic that, you know, which, you know, of course we're talking about her polar area wedges. And so there, I think there's a lot of value in attracting attention by being strange. And one of the best ways to engage people is like, here's something for you to criticize. And as soon as people start jumping over a chart and saying, oh, you could do it this way, or what if you use this data or whatever, like, you've already won.
Yeah, you're right.
You've honestly already won. And you mentioned client work. I did this chart for, and I didn't plan on, you know, showing this, but I'm going to go and try to find it. So I did this chart for a scientific journal, and I don't need to show it to describe it, but the idea was me and the client, we talked through this diagram. It was an explanatory diagram, no data, right? But we talked through this explanatory diagram using sort of conventional ways of thinking about space and time and importance, essentially rectangular coordinates, right? And basic colors. And that was just to sort of get on the same page. But as we were doing that and we're figuring out things in rectangular coordinates, we started thinking about what is sort of the archetypal big fuzzy object that people will remember this by. And you know, as you're designing, you know, sometimes what you can do, or sometimes what I do is, you know, look at things in black and white, you know, turn up the blur on your work really, really high, so that you can like sort of get some sense of like, what is like the big picture thing that people might encounter first, or that people might remember. And I think the isotype designers, and both isotype designers and also I think Scott McCloud, you know, both wrote directly to this. They write to this idea of presenting information in a form that meets how people not only understand it and encounter it, but also how people are going to remember it by. And just don't give them something that they have to process into a memory. Give them the thing that is directly going to be the memory. And that to me that really resonates, in some ways. And so today, what I'm doing today, again, something I can't maybe show immediately, but I'm making an allegorical map, as a project. And an allegorical map meaning it looks like a geographic sort of like video game Dungeons and Dragons, kind of like Fantasy Quest. Well, kind of like the map. Don't get dizzy, but the map behind me, sort of an allegory, so this is, we rotate this up. Yeah. So I work underneath the Neverland map every day. And so I'm making an allegorical map for a client. And why are we making an allegorical map? It's like, the reason we're making an allegorical map is because nobody else does. And because when we show it, everybody's going to like turn their head and be like, what? Like, no, like we haven't seen anything like that in our field, in our industry ever before. So yeah, there's a lot of power in just being different.
Yeah. You've been collecting the in addition to your book, obviously you've been recently, I think, going on a bit of a shopping spree for old isotype books. So and I know you've got a few you can show us. You want to talk a little bit about your collection and how you can fit them in your house?
So let's say the short history is, I wrote this book titled Info We Trust, and for that book I assembled sort of a design library. I went out and bought all the design books I ever wanted, and then that started to leak, and that effort leaked into buying older and older data visualization books and map books. And the problem is that a lot of this stuff can still be bought rather inexpensively. You can buy an 1870s French atlas for $20, stuff like that. And so there's this like confluence of sort of a treasure chest puzzle hunt, kind of go find the things, and great digital tools and bots that can scrape the internet looking for certain works that are out there, and then you're the first one to read this footnote in some old book, and that points the way to something else. And so it's a big game, and the game's really fun to play. And before I show you some of the isotype stuff, I pulled out one particular. So Funkhauser writes sort of the first modern history of data visualization as his thesis in the late 1930s. And one of the footnotes in that book is he mentions this book that was published a couple decades earlier called The War with Germany. And that's sort of what it looks like. And this was published immediately after World War I. And it's just, Funkhauser says it's just one of the best examples of charts, of United States charts like ever. And I gotta agree, it's fantastic. And I pulled it off the shelf, I think yesterday or the day before, because I was like, I wonder if they addressed the 1918 pandemic, the Spanish flu. And sure enough, if we turn to the health and casualties chapter, we can see this giant spike. Let's see. So that giant spike is, and that's just military deaths. I think month by month, or maybe even more often. That it looks like we have maybe weekly data, and you can see like this is being printed, only a few months after that spike occurs. So this is this is almost as real time as some of our officials are able to react to things. And so really cute, little volume, 1919. I only found it because I read a footnote. But it's such a joy now to have it. And we have wonderful resources. You can read this whole thing on archive, and that's wonderful. But there's, sometimes there's just nothing better than pulling it off your own shelf and flipping through it. Yeah. Okay. So I think I'm going to, if we want to see some more things, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually rotate my camera so that it's not me just like awkwardly holding things up, and hopefully that will give everybody a slightly better view. So yeah, if you want to fill in the dead air for like a minute while I switch things around.
I could sing like the Jeopardy theme song or the Flintstones theme song. Well, yeah. So while you do that and turn around, I'll just take this opportunity now, just remind everybody that we're going to keep doing these little chats for the rest of the week. Let's see. Allison Feldman, colleague of mine at Urban, will be talking with us tomorrow. She uses Figma a lot, which is a design tool. She loves it, so she'll chat with us about that on Tuesday. Andy Kirk from Visualizing Data will be chatting on Wednesday morning Eastern time. And then Harry Stevens from the Post Thursday afternoon. And then Echo Rivera from the presentation field will be here on Friday at noon. So if you have time and inclination to attend and say hello, that'd be great. Obviously, with Harry on Thursday, we'll be talking about his animated dot piece from the Washington Post. So I'm sure people have lots of questions. All right, so we have rotated, it looks like. I feel like I'm like in the Library of Congress.
Is this backwards? I can't, wait,
No, you're good.
Oh yeah, it's great. Okay, yeah, I like mirrored my thing, so hopefully it works.
Well done.
Okay, so as part of this kind of like truffle hunt for old data viz, there's a particular isotype chart, which is really wonderful. It's called How Long Do Animals Live? And I'll show it to you in a minute. And I think you might recognize it if you don't already have it in your mind's eye. And all of the isotype sort of scholarship says that How Long Do Animals Live was published in Compton's encyclopedia, Compton's Pictured Encyclopedia in 1939. And so I didn't know which volume it was in. I thought it would be volume 1 for A for animals, but it could be volume, whatever for L for lifespan, like who really knows? And so I went out and bought an entire set of the 1939 encyclopedia. And, at its surface, the encyclopedia is just like fantastic. It's like all these old photographs, and there's diagrams, and there's maps, and there's a lot of charts. So here's a pretty cool diagram of, different sort of kind of like clouds. And all right, so I went through page by page, and sure enough, there's like over 40 isotype charts in this encyclopedia. So provided by Otto Neurath and company. And How Long Do Animals Live was not one of them. And I was really bummed out. I was like, well, this is like all the scholarship says it's in this encyclopedia, but it's not. And so like, what the heck's going on? And so I kind of put it away for a week, and then I returned to it, and I looked at it again, and I went back to A for Animals. Like, this is where it should be. And I came to this spread, and I don't know, can you read this or not? Do I need to move the camera a little bit?
The varied web of animal life.
Yeah, so that's what it says on one side. And then on the other side, you have this graphic. So page 198 has this graphic. I'm going to hold it up a little bit. Maybe this helps. So yeah, the title is going to be here. And basically what this is the lifespan of different animals. And it's not an average lifespan. What you have is the longest age documented for all these different species. And you have like a stack of 3 different like diorama kind of situations with all these different animals. And if you spend any time with it, you realize it's complete bullshit. Because it says this, the longest living swan is 150 years, which is just not true. Like a swan does not, like no swan has ever lived 150 years. Like a goose, 80 years, right? Like, right. And so like, where are they getting this data, right? Like there's junk data somehow feeding into this situation. And then some of them are like, okay, a squirrel lives 6 years. Like, maybe that seems right. A fly lives 5 months. Okay, so what's interesting is that this is obviously the same theme as the famous isotype chart. And so this gave me the right kind of firepower to go purchase a later edition of the encyclopedia. And so you can see the varied web of animal life, right? And then by 1943, you still have the varied web of animal life, but next to it, you have a brand new chart. Yeah. And here's the famous How Long Do Animals Live? I don't know, do you recognize this, John? Maybe you've seen this before. Yeah. I mean, it's like people still get this on like mugs and posters and stuff.
Right.
And what's really great is well, seeing that they didn't just copy all the data, that the numbers are actually have been updated somehow. And so Isotype Institute, or what was to become the Isotype Institute, did their homework. It's obviously a wonderful visual construction because you have this compression. It's always interesting, like when you change scales in a chart or a diagram, how you convey that you're changing scales. And so they change scales with this beautiful compression of this line, almost like a spring. And I really love this. It's also interesting to see, and again, maybe this doesn't come through the screen so well, but to see the original colors of this chart. And so, the insect up here, is actually kind of like a brownie color, whereas I've seen it, and the pearl mussel is the same color. It's also almost like a golden brown, and elsewhere I've seen it done in like a bright yellow. It's definitely not a bright yellow. Again, maybe it's aged. I'm not sure. It's also cool to see like little errors, like the elk is represented by a moose, which is sort of interesting. So what I love about these, and here, maybe we can see them side by side, but what I love about seeing both of these is that it sort of gives a story. Like this famous chart did not come out of the ether, right? It didn't emerge, as a work of genius, out of nothing. Like it has a very clear reference point. And, I don't know what the real story is, but I can imagine Otto or maybe Marie Neurath seeing this and saying, you know what, that is an opportunity. Right. We have an idea. And so they had something to react to. And that's just so true of all creativity. Like you're always riffing on something. You're always recombining, previous elements. And even though it was like this whole boondoggle of getting this entire encyclopedia, like I'm so happy I did, because if I didn't, then I would have this chart, but I wouldn't have any of the context on how they got it. And now we sort of have, a little bit of contrast, and, seeing how things were done before, just makes how they were able to do it like so much more meaningful. Cause it's wrong for starters. It's also dated. It's also thoroughly just not particularly like, interesting, right? There's like
Right.
1,000 things that are the same, whereas this is iconic, right? This, like, even today, this feels like it comes from the future. Like it is so right. It's so beautiful,
right?
So that's my first little Isotype sort of story.
Lovely. Let me Rob wants to know how many books you have there, so I'm going to unmute him here. There you go. Hey, Rob.
Hey, how many sets of encyclopedias do you have by now? Just the 2, or have you gotten more?
Oh, so I've considered buying another set because there are other Isotype charts in the later editions that aren't in the original. So 1939 is the first that includes Isotype charts, but later on they made other charts. And so this is where it becomes really dangerous, because it's not only can become expensive, but also, like, to purchase an encyclopedia, you're eating up an entire shelf essentially. Right. Each one is 15 volumes. And so when I bought the 1943, how long do animals live? I only bought the single volume. I didn't buy the entire encyclopedia. So I have a complete 1939. I have a single book from 1943. And yeah, they're currently on sale. There's like a 1948 or something, like entire set. So I don't know. So like, DM me, and I can give you that link so that one of us, at least one of us.
One of you could have it. So do you think is there? So it's 39 to 43. Do you think there's a 40, 41, and 42 where you can see an evolution of that lifespan graph?
My guess is it's a phase change. It just switched at a certain point. Yeah. And I would like eventually to see every year so that when it switches. But then it becomes like, then you're becoming really, I think, anal about it. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's like good. Like, is 43 the first one? Maybe it was 1942. I don't know, but but we have it, so that's nice.
Nice. Let's see. All right. So Anne has a couple questions. Yeah. She wants to know the difference between an isotope and an isotype.
Yeah. Well, I think an iso, so I don't know a whole lot about basic science, but I know that isotype here, we can give another visual reference. So this, I don't know how this exists. It seems like it shouldn't, but this is a book that was printed in Japan, and you can buy it from JapaneseAmazon.com. And it republishes 3 of the foundational isotype books, International Picture Language, Basic by Isotype, and Modern Man in the Making. And you get all of the original diagrams in full color, which is wonderful. And also, and if you can read Japanese, you get that too, which is great.
Yeah.
But the reason I pull this out, and let's see if we can find this upside down, is that we can see, aha, there we go. So I don't know about isotope, but isotype is an acronym, and it stands for International System of Typographic Picture Education. So isotype, you know, an isotope is a noun, where isotype is actually is sort of a it's more like a verb. It's more like a process.
Yeah.
It's a system, right? And so we can think about isotype icons or isotype pictographs, isotype charts, isotype thinking. You know, sometimes you refer to a single chart as an isotype, but that's probably that you know, if you're really strict about these things, then maybe that wouldn't be correct. Yeah, this is like a $25, $30 book plus like, and this is something I discovered recently, but like, you know, again, I don't know what's happening with the pandemic, but Amazon Japan ships to the United States for like a couple bucks. It's like, and it arrives in like 3 days. It's amazing. It's really amazing.
Yeah.
And you know, there's a whole world of design opportunity and learning, you know, across Asia for us Americans. And I'm only slowly starting to fall into that rabbit hole.
When I was in London in the fall, there was an isotype exhibit at the British Museum, and I have pictures of it, but they have the full original ones, and you can see how the type is cut out, and the icons are all cut out and pasted onto board. So it's pretty amazing.
Here's I mean, this is like a little diagram, but it's just so wonderful. So, you know,
yeah,
right. And
yeah,
it's just
that scale. Yeah,
it's perfect. I mean, it's the perfect, the constant, you know, cathedral, you know, how it's filled and the rest is just lined. And it's like, yeah, well, I mean, yeah, somebody needs to do this with Trinity Church, you know, in downtown.
Yeah.
Downtown New York. Yeah.
That was great. Let me unmute Raul. He had a question on, more questions on isotypes. Go ahead.
Hi everyone. First, for RJ, congrats for the book. It's a great book, Info We Trust. I'm on the final pages, and it's a great book.
Oh, thanks so much.
It's a great source for visual storytellers. Congrats. And the second, this is my question: how has changed the vision that you have of the legacy of Otto Neurath, Jet Arns, and Mario de Meister? Now that you collect all these books and have done all the research that you have done for the next project that you have, what has changed?
What has changed with what? With me?
With the way you see the legacy of Otto Neurath. Team.
Well, yeah. So I mean, I think that one of the things that's changed is I've just learned. You know, I sort of started from a baseline that was pretty low. And so I can't say that I used to think this and now I think that, but what I've developed is a really, I think superficially and at first you are attracted to the work, partially because it's so unique. But then when you actually get into the work and start to recreate it, and especially when you so I've not only made this California map, I've attempted to make lots of other, you know, charts in the isotype sort of style or system. And that's when you really start to appreciate how sophisticated they are. because the way that they are what they would call transforming, which is sort of transforming from the data to the representation of the data, something that we might just call design. The way that they're doing that is being so not only careful, but or delicate, but that and maybe Nigel can help me here with this one. But to for example, take an isotype chart, take a theme, get modern data on the same theme, and try to recreate that chart. Even that is very, very difficult because the units don't always match up, and it just takes a lot of consideration. And so you have this result at the end, which appears very simplistic and almost childlike, but it is actually very, very difficult to produce effectively. At least that's been my experience so far. Maybe with more practice, I'm going to get better at it. I think that one of the things the isotype crew had going for them is that they worked in teams. And I think that teamwork was really, really helpful. One of the things that I have going against me is that, here I am alone in a room. And it's been really wonderful that I have, digital friends, especially Jason Forrest, to sort of bounce ideas and designs back and forth with. But it's really obvious when you're trying to make something that is so efficient, meaning that there's just there's so little room for error with this isotype design that that the critique is more important than any other kind of information design I've ever done. I mean, I've learned so much. So Jason Forrest, Kenneth Field, Rosemary Wardley, Nigel Holmes, like these are all people who have taken a look at my isotype charts and designs and given feedback and say, you're screwing this up, you're screwing that up. I don't understand this symbol. And that's always important and valuable feedback, but it seems even more important and valuable when you're working in the isotype system.
Oh, cool. Thank you.
Does anyone else have any other questions? I'm sure RJ could just talk about his library collection behind him. I was going to ask a similar question I asked before, so I think I'll know your answer. But as you work with clients and organizations, and you are maybe thinking about using isotypes in that work, do you get a lot of pushback? And if you do, like, how do you turn that around and make it? I would guess a lot of places want line charts and bar charts and pie charts, and when you use these more pictograms, do they push back against that?
Yeah. I think that, there's definitely two modes that clients work in. One is give us line charts and bar charts, pie charts. It's really interesting. So I was with this company in New York City, maybe November, and, classic like business, reporting, we got to show this thing to the CEO kind of situation. And it's like, we are able to show the CEO line charts, bar charts, pie charts, circles on a map.
That's it.
No scatter plots. No scatter plots. Those are the four things that you're able to work with. And in some sense, that's very liberating, because if it's obvious that that's the mode that you're in, then I can click into that and I can go really deep on the 1,000 ways to do a bar chart, right? And all the design considerations on how to do a bar chart. And so that's definitely one mode. But more often when people work with me, they're looking for something that's, different and wild and zany, because that's sort of, what I spend a lot of time with.
Right.
And becoming familiar with the 400-year-old history of our craft, that goes at least back to Michael Florent von Longren in late 1620s. What you're able to do is you have all these different examples at your fingertips that you can I'm going to do something like, like this 1885, whatever. And you know, in your head, you feel like you're ripping somebody off and like you're copying something, but really, again, that's sort of where creativity comes from. It's like, I'm going to use this as a starting point and figure out how it can apply and how I can learn from it for this current situation. And then of course you always end up making something totally new.
Right. Anne wants to know about your background and career trajectory and what you're doing now. But I want to, because that sounds like a good like wrap up question.
Yeah.
So Curtis has a question for you, and I'm not exactly sure what project he's referring to, so I'm going to let him ask you.
Cool.
Sure. Can you hear me?
There you go. Hey.
Hey, RJ. First of all, John, thanks for arranging these. This has been fantastic, really great. RJ, my first exposure to you was the covered piece you did for Significance on the Menard by Dubois sort of visualizations on the Great Migration.
Sure.
Could you talk a little bit about, like the process, like including like tools, how you use to like recreate the Menard, but with with lynchings instead of the, like the temperature for the bottom graph and the approach to that.
So I could give both a generic, kind of talk about tools and process. I can also talk directly to that project, but I will say that I wrote a design essay about that project on my website under probably essays. And if you send me a direct message on Twitter or something, then I can give you that link. But generally, when I'm asked a question about tools and process, I'm able to give like a hand wavy sort of the most important tool is pencil and paper, and then defer like actually answering the question and talk about what tools I actually use. But I'm now in a situation where I have a job where it's one of those jobs where you have to use their laptop. And I had to give them like a shopping list. Like this is, so like, I actually finally had to commit to a stack of tools, and so like, what did I ask for? Like I asked for Creative Suite, Adobe Creative Suite. So Photoshop, Illustrator, After Effects, Premiere Pro. Okay. And InDesign. Okay. So I have all those. I have Tableau. I have RStudio. I have Microsoft Visual Studio. And what else do I have? But like, it was the first time in my life where I had to like, actually like, here's my shopping list. And part of the reason for that very broad shopping list. So you have analytic tools, you have prototyping tools, you have web publishing tools, you have like, kind of like print production kind of publishing tools. I don't know like where the work is going to take me, but those are sort of like, that's sort of like the landscape that I'm really interested in. Okay. So that piece in particular, so I did that with Howard Weiner. Howard has been an incredible mentor across several years, and one of the forces that has sort of sucked me into my big interest in the history of information graphics. And Howard and I would talk. I would trade sketches. We would trade sketches back and forth. And so when I say sketches, I mean things that are basically EDA, data visualization that only makes sense if you're really involved with the process and have all the context, in your working memory. And those sketches were made in Tableau and Keynote. And the big sketches that we were working on was to understand what transformation we wanted to use. So there's this concept of the ladder of transformation. And so the logarithmic transformation has gotten a lot of press across the last couple of weeks, courtesy John Murdoch. But that's not the only transformation. There's many ways you can, position your data, right? And so I can give a quick illustrative plug to the ladder of transformation because it's one of the things I illustrated in Info We Trust. And I believe it's sort of one of the, here it is. So here you can screenshot that and then you don't have to grab the book. You can just, and so you can see that basically, you start with Y and you can either march up the ladder or down the ladder. And you can see that log of Y is on the ladder, but it's one of many rungs of the ladder. So Howard was the one who taught me about the ladder of transformation. That was really important in our analysis. Okay, so then production comes along and you want this like you want this Menard sort of like handcrafted sort of field. And like, honestly, the best way to achieve that is to actually make it by hand. And so I don't know if I don't have it at my fingertips, but close by, you know, I have, you know, it's just, I drew a map of America, you know, on a piece of paper with ink, right? And scanned it. And, you know, that was our base map. And we sort of went from there. And so, you know, there's other sort of, you know, aesthetic things you can do, like, oh, it looks like old paper and this is an old timey font. And like, there's like stuff like that. And you can go as crazy or not as you want with that kind of stuff. But, you know, the basics are kind of having a vision in your head, and then figuring out what tools are the right tools to bring that vision into the world. That's how I approach, you know, all my projects. And that's not always the best way. Like some people are, that means I'm a master of no tool. I'm not particularly great at any. And some people are really great at a particular tool. They do everything in that tool, and, you know, they're probably able to churn out a lot more work than I can. Yeah.
Right. So Anne has one last question. I think it's a good, maybe wrap up question, which is she wants to just hear a little bit more about your background, your education, career trajectory, and what you're up to now. So, you know, I think just tell us a little bit more about who is.
Oh boy. Okay. So I'm a professional data storyteller based in San Francisco. I say data storyteller because, and I found that term to be very useful. It makes most normies sort of, you know, pause and ask, like, what's that?
Normies?
You know,
is that what we're doing now? Is that what we're doing now?
Well, I mean, if you're in this field,
I'm fine with it. I'm fine with it. Just to be clear, I'm totally fine with it.
If you're on this chat and you're interested in this craft and you think you're a normie, I've got news for you. You are not. You are an outlier.
Outlier.
Okay. We are outliers. We are not normies. So how do you become an outlier? I think that it goes back to my family. I come from a very artistic family, and a family that was into theater, drama, photography, art, architecture, history, really sort of the whole, you know, sort of panopticon, you know, of kind of like human experience. Then I go to college and strict engineering school, and a lot of that richness gets stripped away as you are forced to focus on something very, very narrow. And then I work as a pure engineer, and I'm frustrated because the richness of human experience is sort of is just sort of taken away from my work. And so I bust out of that, and I fight and find a way to, you know, to work in a field where you're able to play with art and design and math and history and all kinds of different, you know, fields and industries. And, you know, that's been a really delightful experience that I think is not a unique experience for people who do this kind of work. Yeah.
Great. So let me round up Anne's question. So I know you have the California map is on your desk right now. Do you have any other big projects that you're working on that you can talk about, I should say?
Yeah. So I'm working on this this allegorical map, and
right.
And so I don't know if it's, so here's this may or may not, here, give me 1 second. I think it's worth the pause. Give me 1 second.
Okay. I would sing it. I could sing the Jeopardy thing again for everybody, but I'm not sure it's going to work. We did it this morning. We had a phone call this morning, and as we logged in, someone actually did put on the Jeopardy theme song while we waited for everybody to log in. So we were just talking about you, RJ, while you were gone. No problem.
So, I mean, the secret is I don't know how to draw. I don't like at all. Like I'm not a good illustrator. And so, but what I know how to do is trace. I'm really good at tracing things. And so if you're going to make an allegory map, and again, an allegorical map is basically this idea that it looks like a real place, but it's not. So allegorical maps are really popular, like to show things like the whole world of love and all the different kind of emotions of love, you know, things like that. Or an allegorical map was sort of like how to save your soul, or you know, how to go from, you know, how to avoid all the vices on the way to becoming, you know, sort of a good productive worker, you know, things like that. So that's what allegorical maps used to be used for. And so I'm making an allegorical map that's going to basically look like a treasure map, similar to the Neverland map back there. But I don't know how to draw, right? So what am I going to do? Because not only do I want to show this from like a top-down view, but I want to show different perspectives. Like if you're on this island, then it's going to look like this. Or if you're on that island, it's going to look like that. And then I remember this thing I learned from Fernando at National Geographic, which is Fernando, to get his shadow reference, he actually creates 3D models in white Sculpey, I think, and then takes it outside and photographs it and uses that as a shadow reference for his, you know, beautiful digital illustration. So I remembered that. And because I learned that from Fernando, then what I did is I actually made, and these islands are not in the arrangement that they're going to be eventually, but these are just kind of loose. But I made this. I made a little Play-Doh like model of my allegorical world, right? And then what I'm able to do is photograph this from whatever angle I want, and then have that as a reference. And then I can take those photos into Photoshop, turn the contrast way up, desaturate them, have great shadow reference, and then I can, you know, do with them, you know, whatever I'm doing next. And honestly, I've never done this before. This is completely crazy. Right. But, you know, because it's so wacky and different, you know, when I first showed the client this like situation, they're like, oh my God, like we've never seen anything like this. And I'm like, well, we could like lean into this like more traditional way of doing things. And they're like, no, everybody's seen that before. Like everybody's seen this particular metaphor. We want this weird metaphor. So again, it's always a joy because you're always doing something a little bit different.
Right. Well, that's great. That's great. So I don't see any other questions in the chat box. So no need to hold people for just, you know, hanging out. I'll just say thanks, RJ, for coming on. This was a lot of fun. Always good to see you. And thanks everyone for tuning in and joining us. We'll do this again tomorrow with Allison Feldman, a designer, and we'll just talk about design, something that I know precious little about. So I hope to learn a lot. So thanks everybody. Stay well, stay healthy, stay safe. Thanks guys. Bye everybody.